Is Malachi Boyuls, who is one of a crowded field of 2014 candidates for the Railroad Commissioner. You all know, because we have met a lot of these folks, and will continue to over the next few weeks, but not next week. We're off next week. Don't be here Tuesday. We're all going to be home. But after that, we will continue, and then pretty much in January, things start going like gangbusters until we get to this primary. So we will begin with our speaker tonight, our guest speaker, Malachi Boyuls, and you all know that after his comments that we'll have a question and answer time when you'll be thinking and coming up with all those things that we consider when we do our vetting, which is not only candidacy, the quality of it, and the person and the values, but path to victory. And you'll have some good questions because you've met the other candidates too. So with that, please help me welcome Malachi.
So I get the pleasure of following the Gettysburg Address. Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I gotta say, it's anticipated to be a crowded field. Right now, I'm the only one filed, so I'm running unopposed. Yeah. Well, look, this is a great opportunity for me to be here, and you know, look, people are frustrated right now with the government, with the federal government. They're angry. But as I've traveled the state, I've got to say I'm actually very optimistic about the future of the state. It's the best state and the best country in the world. I think we can all agree to that. And what makes me optimistic is groups like this and people like you who are getting engaged and becoming involved, and they understand that we have an obligation and a duty to ensure that the Texas of tomorrow is actually better than the Texas of today. And that's why we're here. And that's why I'm running for Railroad Commissioner. Which, as you know, and I don't have to explain this to you, especially being in Houston, but the Railroad Commission has nothing to do with trains and railroads. My 5-year-old son is very disappointed with that. He is still pretty supportive, but he is just now a lot less interested in what I'm doing. But you know, the Railroad Commission actually regulates Texas energy, Texas oil, natural gas, coal, and then actually uranium mining. And you know, Texas energy is going to play a huge role in the future of our state. It's already playing a significant role now. It's driving a lot of what's going on economically. And I think, you know, through the course of this campaign, traveling the state, I talk a lot about energy and politics. So I can't imagine a better place to do that than here, in the Woodlands in Houston, with the energy capital of this country at least, and the Patriot PAC. So what a great opportunity. You know, like I said, Texas energy right now is playing a huge role in what's going on in our state. The oil and gas industry by itself is responsible for hundreds of thousands of jobs. Some estimates say as high as 475,000 jobs in Texas. That is billions of dollars in economic impact in this state. You know, not just capital investment in new projects or refineries or LNG facilities, but that's taxes, right? In 2012, the oil and gas industry was responsible for $12.1 billion in state and local revenue in 2011. Projected forward, that could be up to $350-something million by 2035. The jobs numbers is expected to almost double in about the next 20 years because of everything that's going on in Texas. And that's significant. You know, we hear a lot about the rainy day fund, right? And we're fighting about if we're going to spend that money, how we're going to spend that money. But we can't have those arguments. We can't even have those discussions without the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry from severance taxes largely funds the rainy day fund, and it gives us that opportunity to even figure out whether we're going to spend that on infrastructure or what we're going to do. So the oil and gas industry right now is driving a lot of what we're doing in the state economically. And again, it's projected to grow significantly. The reality is that's not inevitable. The Railroad Commission is a crucial agency to an industry that is vital to Texas right now. And it is very important that we elect somebody to the Railroad Commission who has a record, but a record of experience and success in an industry that it regulates. You know, I'm a small business owner and own a small business it's called St. Augustine Partners, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And what we do is we are involved in all capacities, well, not all, but in a variety of capacities within the oil and gas industry, from drilling to mineral and royalty interests, so property rights, from water disposal, from water transportation to servicing companies. And so we've had the experience all throughout this industry. We've been a part of growing jobs. We've been a part of investing in this state and doing what we can as an entity to ensure the sustained economic success of Texas. But what we've also done is we've been able to be a part of projects all across the state, all across the country rather. We've done stuff in Pennsylvania, and we've done a little bit in North Dakota with the Bakken, in New Mexico, and Texas. And the reality, after all that experience in all these other states, the reality is we do a pretty good job in Texas. We have the longest standing oil and gas agency in the country, and the Railroad Commission, in fact, is the oldest agency in the state. So we are doing well, and we are projected to do even better. But that's not inevitable. We need somebody on the Railroad Commission who has the experience and the track record to understand what it takes to create jobs, to encourage investment, and to allow for continued economic success. The trick is the government doesn't do that, right? The government doesn't create jobs, and never has. Well, it has, but those aren't the jobs we want, right? The federal government's pretty good at creating jobs. And it doesn't grow an economy. What it does, it kind of sets the rules of the game. It sets the ground rules, and it creates the environment in which industry, which people in Houston, which people in Midland, all over the place are able to create jobs and help grow this economy. Again, I've got that experience in the industry, and we'll take that to the Railroad Commission. The second thing that's going to allow me to that success in this industry on the agency is I've been appointed to Governor Perry a few years ago appointed me to the board of a state agency. So I've been a part of regulating an industry, and just so happens that as he appointed me, we were in the process as an agency of transitioning from a wholly dependent agency on general revenue to a semi-independent agency. And so we had to figure out where our budget was going to come from. I had the honor or dishonor, I'm not exactly sure, of being the chair of the budget committee. And so we had to figure out how we were going to fund the agency and how we were going to do that in a way that didn't crush the industry. Right? I mean, we talk about taxes a lot, but I think unnecessary fees are just as bad and are just as harmful for an industry. So we had to figure out a way to essentially regulate an industry and allow create an environment in which that industry could grow. And we did it successfully. And that's something that I want to continue to do on the Railroad Commission. The second big thing we need to think of when we're thinking about this race is the EPA and the federal government. Right? This isn't a federal race. I'm not running against Barack Obama. But the reality is the EPA and the federal government aren't huge fans of Texas. We see the EPA trying to get their hands on Texas energy all over the state. In North Texas, they're trying to regulate methane emissions from gas wells. In East Texas, they're trying to regulate the pressurization of that field. They're afraid that it's going to cause seismic activity. In West Texas, the federal government is trying to use a chicken to stop production. Mind you, this same chicken is actually hunted in Kansas. So they're trying to use a chicken that has a hunting season in Kansas to stop production in West Texas. Why are they doing that? Well, turns out the West Texas field, the Permian Basin, is one of the biggest in the world, right? Second only to one in Saudi Arabia. They are doing everything they can to slow down production here. And if you want a sense of what that would look like, let's compare the federal land production to state land production. On the federal lands these days, it takes anywhere from 190 days to 280 days to get a drilling permit. A couple years ago, we found that the federal government was sitting on permits, which cost tens of thousands of jobs. It's no better these days. In Texas, people complain about the permitting process still, but you can get a drilling permit in about 30 days or less. Pretty stark contrast, right? We talk about production. In Texas and everywhere else in the country, for that matter, production is skyrocketing. We're finding new reserves, we're drilling more wells, we're producing so much more energy in Texas and in all these private lands and state lands. Well, in the federal lands, gas production is down about 30%. Oil production is down about 100,000 barrels a day. So if we want the federal government to regulate industry, that's what our oil and gas industry is going to look like. What that means is fewer jobs, significantly less money back in our economy, and then the piece that they don't talk about much is we get further and further away from energy independence. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So we need somebody on the Railroad Commission who has experience standing up to the federal government and pushing them back. Now look, a lot of people in this race are going to say that they will do that, and I don't question their sincerity. I think everybody in this race will commit themselves to standing up and fighting the federal government. The trick is to have somebody with a record of doing that. Before we started this business, I was a regulatory attorney at a big firm in Dallas, one of the world's best law firms, and I represented industry and businesses against the federal government. I represented one of Texas's largest coal producers against the EPA in their retroactive enforcement of the Clean Air Act. You know what? We won. And I have stood toe-to-toe against the EPA and the federal government and have a track record of success. Not only have I sued the federal government in that capacity, but I've worked within their own internal rulemaking process, which is a very tedious process, very complex process. And what they're trying to do is come in and regulate little by little. They're too smart, which may be an oxymoron for the federal government, but they're too smart to say, look, we're going to come in and take over fracking altogether. They're going to come in and try to regulate little pieces, and so little by little by little by little, they're going to have their hands on Texas energy. We've got to be able to identify what they're trying to do and use their own game against them. I've got the track record of doing that, and I think it's vitally important for Texas economy, and for Texas jobs to have somebody on the Railroad Commission who's able and willing to do that. I've fought for Texas, I've fought for Texas jobs, and I will always fight for Texas jobs. Third, we've got to have somebody on the Railroad Commission who is committed to ensuring that Texas continues to lead the United States to energy independence. And the reality is we're close. We've been talking about energy independence. I have not been talking about energy independence since the 70s, but people have been talking about energy independence since the 70s, right? And it's always just seemed out of reach. Well, you know what? We're getting closer. The United States is now the #1 oil and gas producer in the world. We've surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia. By next year, by either 2015 or 2016, the United States is going to be the #1 oil producer, right? Everybody knows about our significant natural gas reserves, but in about 2 years, we're going to be the #1 oil producer in the world. I mean, think about that. That's significant, right? A lot of that is actually driven by what's going on right here in Texas. The Permian Basin, like I mentioned, is probably the second biggest field in the world. The Eagle Ford, we don't even know how big that field is because it's still new. The Permian we've been drilling for decades. We thought we were going to be tapped out in the 70s or 80s. Not so fast, my friend. It's getting bigger, and the Eagle Ford, it's still continuing to grow. Now look, because of that production, we can get closer and closer to energy independence. The problem is the federal government doesn't want us to get there. As much as they say they want to be net exporters of energy, they want to rely less on our enemies overseas, their kind of actions belie their words, right? I mean, the Keystone Pipeline is a perfect example. They've been sitting on that thing for 5 years, over 5 years, reviewing it. If they cared anything at all about energy independence, President Obama would get out there with a hammer and a hard hat and build that thing himself. He has not done that. What they're doing now, we hear even just today we got an article that says opponents of the Keystone Pipeline are saying that we need to review further because of environmental impact. And we've been reviewing the thing for 5 years. You'd think we know what's wrong with it, right? Or how to get this thing through. They don't want that. They'd rather invest in green energy. They'd rather invest taxpayer dollars, actually, in green energy, whether it's solar panels, wind farms, whatever it might be, than really focus on the resources we have at home. How's that worked out? Right? And it hasn't. First off, I don't think those sources of energy have the capacity to handle the resource or our needs. Second, I mean, every company that they've invested in so far, I think, has gone bankrupt. It's not the business of government to do that, right? It's certainly not the business of federal government. Texas regulates Texas energy, and we've done it for a long time. Little known fact, we have more pipeline miles in Texas than we have highway miles. We've been doing this for a long time, and we've been doing it well. We've got to have somebody on the Railroad Commission who understands that, who's committed to the commission, and committed to the success of Texas. I don't want to be that guy. Now, that's kind of the macro issues on the Railroad Commission. We can talk a lot more about property rights, right? I mean, property rights are a big deal, especially for groups out in East Texas and South Texas where they're dealing with a lot of these things for the first time. I want to make very clear that the Railroad Commission, the next Railroad Commissioner, is elected by Texans to serve Texans. They're not elected by an industry. They're not supposed to serve an industry. They're supposed to stand up for Texas. Now, we've got to figure out a solution there. Eminent domain is a big deal that a lot of people are talking about. We've got to find a solution that allows us to get to energy independence, and we need this infrastructure to get there, but we've also got to protect the property rights. We're Texas, for goodness sake. Property rights is a big deal, so we've got to find a solution. When I was in law school, I had the opportunity to work with now Justice Alito, and one of the things I learned most wasn't any sort of substantive law, but I learned values that Constitution matters, property rights matter, and so I mean, gun rights, pro-life, I mean, all of those things matter. But we also learned how to solve difficult issues in a way that protected those rights. And it's, again, another experience I want to take to the Railroad Commission. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about me personally, because I do think that that's very important in any race, and especially, I've never run for office before. I think it's very important that you get to know the candidates and the values that underlie what they're saying, right? I grew up in Fredericksburg, Texas, and actually met my wife there. We were high school sweethearts. But I was raised by my mom and with my two sisters. And you know, we talk a lot about the Texas miracle or the Texas promise, and you know, that's something that's very personal to me because I am a product of that promise. I grew up with a single mom and two sisters, and my mom taught me from day one. Little did I know she was teaching me how to be a conservative, but she taught me from day one the values that underlie that promise. She taught me that hard work, strong faith, and integrity will get you opportunity. Once you have that opportunity, it's up to you to capitalize on that. She taught us that we didn't need help from any government agency. She was going to work 2 jobs if she had to give us everything everything we needed. And we did. We had everything we needed. We didn't have a lot, but we had everything we needed. And we knew that we would have the opportunity to succeed. Well, I listened to her sometimes and had the opportunity to go to college. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I went to Mary Hardin-Baylor and was a religion major there. I played football there too. But you know, I had planned on going into ministry, and at the very last second, I hope there are not a lot of lawyers in the room, but very last second, I decided to go the opposite direction and went to law school. But you know, and even lawyers will I think sympathize that maybe NYU is the opposite of ministry, right? But again, was there and had the opportunity to go to a great law school, and that's because of these values, these Texas values that were very deep within me. Hard work, faith, and integrity. We would have opportunity, and it was up to us to capitalize on that. When I was at NYU, I had the great fortune to work with now Justice Alito, so I was in this bastion of liberalism with one of the most conservative, principled men I've ever met in my entire life. And so it was a great opportunity to defend these conservative positions that I learned when I was a kid, that I grew up with and just kind of thought to be, you know, some sort of natural law. And found quickly that there were certainly people who disagreed with me and fundamentally disagreed with me. So it was a great opportunity to really stand on principle and to try to articulate what I believed. Then I had this great reprieve that not a lot of people do, to go back to Justice Alito and commiserate and say, oh, they were so mean to me. But you know, it's a great opportunity to just see those principles in action, right? When you're dealing with cases, we dealt with issues of life, and as you guys know, Justice Alito was the dissenter in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and his dissent was largely, you know, kind of the model for our attack on these abortion cases. And so to learn those principles from him and to see them in action was something that I will cherish, that will really drive me in everything I do. After law school, I got back to Texas as quickly as I could, being a good Texas boy, married to a Texas girl who would settle for nothing less. Got back to Texas as soon as we could. I started working at a law firm, big law firm, and then started a business. Now, I tell you this because, not because I want you to feel all warm and gushy when you get to know me more, but you know, the Texas opportunity is something that's real, right? And the Texas values that get us that opportunity are something that we need to maintain. I have a 5- and a 3-year-old, and I want to do everything I can on the Railroad Commission and life to ensure my kids have that same opportunity, to ensure that the next generation has that opportunity, and then they're well equipped to capitalize on that. You know, I think it's important, if we're going to talk about keeping Texas red, if we're going to talk about winning the hearts and minds of the next generation, we've got to understand first that we don't have to change our message. We don't have to moderate our message. And anybody who says that is dead wrong, because our message wins, and our message has always won. What we need is we need to be able to relate to them. We need a new generation of leaders to win the hearts and minds of the next generation, right? We need to let them know that we are like you, listen to me, and let's help you. Let me help you help yourself, basically. And so we've got to have a conservative message, and we've got to have a generation of leaders that can reach that next generation, that can reach the rising demographics. And I think that means a couple things. We have to make an effort towards them. I think making an effort with the next generation, with these rising demographics, is a huge step in that direction. Then we've got to be able to relate to them. And I think it's more than just about race. I think it's more than just about gender. It's about being able to share life experiences with them. Being able to say, look, I grew up with a single mom too. My mom worked 2 jobs too. We struggled, but we had the opportunity to succeed. We want to teach you how to capitalize on that opportunity. We want to ensure that you know that you have that opportunity, and we want you to succeed. I think that's very important, right? And we are blessed in this state to have had, you know, we have an abundance of leaders who have served nobly for a very long time. But it's time for a new generation. And so I think we need to keep the message, but potentially a new messenger. Just so happens, my name, right? It's a big name, and it's an interesting name. But Malachi actually is the last book in the Old Testament, and it means messenger. It's convenient, right? Well, it means messenger, and that's why I'm running for Railroad Commission. I want to be a messenger for our conservative values. I want to be a messenger on the Railroad Commission for energy independence and for a stronger economy. But more importantly, I want to be a messenger for the future of Texas, for this next generation. So for those reasons, and the many others we'll talk about right now, I would love your support. Please consider this campaign. My website is malachifortexas.com. We've got some cards out there, and we'd love for you to visit our website. We've got a great new video with my wife on there, and you will like her so much better than me, I promise you, so please look at that. And, you know, ask me questions, vet your candidates, make sure that they share your values, and, you know, because this future is way too important. You know, I think I'm best suited for this job, and I'll tell you why in a second, but it's just way too important to pick somebody we like and hope we got it right. So. Yes, ma'am.
What caused you to go from working at a law firm to starting your own business that had to do with oil and stuff?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. This is going to sound like very campaigny, but it's really not. First off, I think I'm an entrepreneur trapped in a lawyer's body, which made me want to start my own business. But second, energy is something I've always been passionate about, and I didn't talk much about this, and I probably should have, but the implications it has not only on, you know, energy and our energy needs and being able to supply those needs, or to fill those needs, but the implication it has on the economy, which we talked about, which are significant. You know, one of the things that the oil and gas, they're creating all these jobs, but these jobs are real jobs. The average salary is about $125,000. Texas employs 40% of the entire oil and gas workforce in the United States. So 40% makes about an average of $120,000. Those jobs are jobs that are going to allow families to make decisions that they couldn't have otherwise made, right? They're going to pay off debt on their houses. They're going to send kids to college for the first time, which impacts that kid and the generations after that kid. They're going to allow young people to start families, which I think is significant. So those are big jobs. But then even outside of that, think about the national implications that has. You know, if we're able to make foreign policy and national security decisions without that energy backdrop, you know, with a better administration, we can make better decisions. And then from an energy independence standpoint, I mean, look, so energy right now, it affects all of our lives. You know, if you think, well, I'm not in the oil and gas industry, so why should I care? Well, because of those other issues, you should care. But even economically, my wife is originally from Brady, and then she moved to Fredericksburg. Brady was a town that was dying. People were moving out, and they were concerned about what they were going to do. And now it's booming. They're not drilling any wells there, but they've got sand that people use in fracking. And so they've got these big sand plants. And so people are moving in, they're building new houses. But in addition to the people who are directly employed by the sand plants, there are new stores, there are new restaurants, there are new teachers, new doctors. And so it's really impacting that community. In Midland, somebody at Subway gets a $1,000 signing bonus and $15 an hour at Subway. They're not in the oil and gas industry, but they're certainly benefiting from it. So energy is something that's always been I've always been passionate about, and I'm an entrepreneur trapped in a lawyer's body, so I had an opportunity and did it. Yes, ma'am.
Why you over the other candidates?
Yes. Well, I think, without repeating myself, I think the biggest distinguishing factor, I think, is the breadth of experience. So the energy industry experience, understanding what it takes, the impact regulation has on you doing business, right? So doing business in Pennsylvania and New Mexico and Texas, you see pretty clearly the different regulatory environments, and there's a reason why we're doing well in Texas. Of course, we have the resources here, but we also have the business and climate and the regulatory environment that allows that economic growth. And so I've seen that, and I've had to live under that for, a living, basically. But then couple that with the experience fighting back the federal government and the EPA. I mean, look, this is a real challenge that we're going to have to face. Somebody on the Railroad Commission is going to have to step up and take on that challenge. They're going to have to push back the federal government. They're going to have to push back the EPA, whether it's working with the Attorney General's office and saying, look, here's arguments that will work. Having been a clerk for a judge and with Justice Alito, I actually saw the, many cases concerning the EPA. So I've seen their tactics, and I've seen the decision-making process, actually, and figured out, and saw firsthand what wins. And so being able to contribute in that capacity is very important. But then also being able to stand up to the EPA within their internal processes through this regulatory and rulemaking process. That's something that I'm familiar with, and nobody in this race is. And so being able to stand up to the federal government and really push back and do so effectively, I think is crucial.
Okay. Your business?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's start with Maverick PAC.
Okay.
What is Maverick PAC for folks
Yeah.
that don't know? And relationship to the Bushes, relationship to Ted Cruz, and
Yeah.
everyone else who's
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah. So did everybody hear that? So the question was about this group called the Maverick PAC, which is a political action group, basically. My relationship to the Bushes, and then my relationship to Ted Cruz and anybody else involved with Maverick PAC. So Maverick PAC is a group. It was so they're the Mavericks. In 2004, I believe, during President Bush's re-elect, there are these different levels of fundraisers or bundlers, I guess, pioneers. I don't even know what they were. And then Mavericks. Mavericks was people 40 and under who raised $50,000 or more. I was not a part of that group, unfortunately. But I was not a part of that group. But they did so well, and I think a group of 8 of them in Texas raised millions of dollars. And there's a lot of people actually here in Houston who were some of the founding members. Jim Lee, Charles Eskridge at Sussman, Chad Sweet, Ted Cruz, and some others. And so they said, look, we did such a good job at that. We were so effective, and 30-somethings made a real impact in a presidential race and had access and were able to really vet candidates and then support who they liked. So they said, look, we were so good at that, let's keep this organization together and just be impactful in races. And so they started doing that. I got involved after I got out of law school, so about 2006-ish, I guess. And just kind of was a member, and that's where I got to know Ted Cruz first, and then Chad Sweet and Charles Eskridge, who was, I think he might have been on Ted's finance committee. Steve Cox, who's a Houston guy, who was Ted's co-finance chair. So, and then Susanna Docupil, who is involved here. I got to know her through Maverick PAC. And so that's how I kind of really started getting politically active, was through that group and with those people. Maverick PAC since has kind of changed a little bit, and instead of being kind of a smaller group that really focused on fundraising for candidates, it is now more of a national organization that is trying to reach young professionals and younger people kind of for a conservative cause. And so it's got a national board. It's got chapters in Florida, New York, Chicago, Texas, and then several in Texas, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin, and then maybe California. So now it's more of kind of a young professional grassroots organization, I guess. George P. Bush is a part of it now. I think George either is or was the most recent co-chair of it. The other was Fred Zeidman, or not Fred Zeidman, Jay Zeidman, Fred Zeidman's son, who's from Houston. And I had largely been, I was involved early with the kind of the old guys, and then had kind of just been not really even a member much, but then they asked me to come back on board as a candidate selection chair, kind of as an old guy, one of the older members who was part of what it used to be kind of a voice of wisdom on the newer organization. And George P. was a part of that. I got to know George P. Bush first when I got back to Texas and worked for a judge, and he had worked for a judge a couple years before I had. And we just got introduced and just became friends that way. And so now we go into so I got to know those guys. And then George P. and I actually started this business together, St. Augustine Partners. We're business partners, and we started that a couple years ago, and have been working together on that since then. And you know, so the relationship there is, look, George is a friend of mine. I've been friends with George for probably 6 years now, 5 years or so, and have worked with him for a few years now. And you know, we're friends and business partners. We don't always agree on everything, and we certainly aren't running. You know, I've heard from there, are you guys running like co-campaigns to take over the state? We're not doing that. If you notice our fundraising, mine's is very good, but his is very, very good. Our fundraising is a little different, and you know, and then we just have different approaches. You know, I've been endorsed by Kathy Adams and Kay Goolsby, who's Ted Cruz's grassroots chair, Texas Right to Life. Denise McNamara in Houston, and you know, great conservative leaders, and he hasn't. So, you know, we differ on some policy issues, but we're friends, and we'll probably remain friends. And President George W. Bush has not contributed to my campaign, and I don't think anybody named Bush has contributed to my campaign. Yes, sir.
Your business. What's up with your website?
What's wrong with it?
Well, you go on it, and you have. The only thing you can do is write. And you write, you get a filled out email to somebody named Julie.
Julie, yeah. Julie's our assistant.
There's no information. And when we vet, we spend hours on
Yeah.
racing.
Yeah.
And we go in and we run up as many rabbit holes as we can. And one of the things we do is pull up the website, and it's just kind of wicked.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably more of an economic thing than anything. You know, we're trying to run as little overhead as we can, and so a lot of the stuff we work on, which is, you know, we've done drilling projects in the Permian, and the Marcellus, Pennsylvania. We've done royalty fund, saltwater disposal stuff, and a lot of that stuff is, you know, we're not marketing anything. We're not marketing what we're doing or what we're selling. We're not marketing any sort of investments we're making, and so we just didn't feel the need to expend the capital on the website part. That's really it.
So that's a business website?
Yeah.
Political.
Well, my political website has all sorts of information.
It's a business, but we're researching the business.
Yeah, I'm happy to say, I mean, if anybody needs to know any more about it, I'm happy to send more information.
So there's another candidate, who is just focused on his railroad commission job. And there are a couple of other people who talked about one of the social issues. Why are the social issues relevant to the job of the railroad commission? Why should they come to the commission?
Well, I think because they're proxies for values, I think, and I think it's very important for people to know their candidates. I mean, one of the reasons it's important is because it's important to voters, and if voters want to know something, they have every right to know that. And if you're not willing to tell somebody, then you know, suffer the consequences. But I do think it's important because it's important to voters. But I also think that it's, like, again, just a proxy for values, right? If you, the life issue, for example, there's been a lot written lately about the life issue, and the Railroad Commission has no authority over life. But you know, the reality is, people can at least attempt to use the Railroad Commission to run for something else. And so if voters are going to put somebody in that position and give them that platform, they've got to know that if and when that person decides they want to do something else, that they trust that person, regardless of what it is. And I think it's a proxy for other values. You know, we can know a lot of the issues that we're facing, that the Railroad Commission is facing now, and probably even in 2 to 3 years. But we're not going to know what the issues are in 6 years. We're not going to know what the issues are in 8 years. And we've got to ensure that the person we elect to that office shares our values, shares our kind of decision-making tree. And I think that's some indication of what those values might be. And I do think it's important.
Okay, super.
Yes, ma'am.
One last question.
Other than the, dealing with the EPA, what do you consider your biggest challenge would be as railroad commissioner?
That's a great question. The EPA is a big one. Look, and I think, so there are a couple. I mean, I think, and I know we're running it. One of them is making sure that there are that the Railroad Commission runs efficiently. Right now, there's some backlog in permits. There's a difficulty with attracting staff and retaining staff, and just making sure that the agency itself isn't a drag on an industry that's really driving what we're doing economically. So I think making sure that we run efficiently. You know, they're doing an IT upgrade and trying to do more online, and so making sure that we can provide the efficiencies that we need for the industry and the information we need for the public is one of the big ones, I think. And then just the leadership. I think a big issue is leadership. Making sure that we elect somebody who understands what it means to serve. You know, that serving means serving Texas and doing what's right before serving yourself. Standing on principle of conviction, even if it means losing an election, and really being able to articulate the message to the staff and to the agency. We're for Texas, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure Texas succeeds. So I think those two issues are really big.
Super, super. All right, thank you.